Hey, friends. I have a fun Willie Nelson story for you guys today. It's from this book. It's Willie's autobiography. It's a long story, My Life, Willie Nelson with David Ritz. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend you picking up a copy. It's really, really good. It's a lot of feel good, crazy Willie stories. And truth is, we need as many feel good stories as we can get these days. And I got plenty of them from this. But a lot gets made of the time that Willie Nelson left Nashville and went down to Texas and how he got his creative life in order, and became what he thought was his truer self. But no one ever talks about the time in New York in between there and how New York figured into it. And in his book, Willie Nelson gives New York a lot of credit. And I thought that would be good to share with you guys today. But if you hear a noise, it's my roommate Frankie. He's sitting next to me and he's purring. Or if you see him moving around, I apologize if it's distracting. But the story begins with Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings talking, and Waylon is telling Willie about his new lawyer. And I apologize for the language. If there's young kids watching, you might want to have them leave the room. But Waylon says, everyone in Nashville hates him. Willie says, that's a reason for me to hire him. He says, that's right, Hoss. The best reason of all. These motherfuckers at the label have us buffaloed. I'm just now seeing how they've been doing their double dealing bookkeeping and hiding my royalties. My old candy ass managers were too scared of the system to challenge it. But this new guy isn't. This guy's from New York and he's a frickin' bulldog. What'd you say his name was? Neil Reshin. He audited these labels and found over 200,000 sold albums unaccounted for. He says I got over 100 G's, maybe more, due me in back royalties. He's also demanding that they change up the royalty rates that haven't changed since Thomas Edison invented electricity. That could mean millions for me and you. Willie says, well, who are his clients besides you? He says, only one other client, Miles Davis. I don't know what you know about Miles. Willie says, I know his music and I love it. He says, well, I don't really know his records, but I do know Miles Davis don't mess around. He's all business. He's about the only jazz musician out there getting rich, and that's because he's got Neil Reshin taking on the label bosses. So Willie hires this lawyer, and he figures he's going to go ahead and let him take care of his entire business and go up against the labels and get whatever kind of royalties that he's got coming to him. And we fast forward. Uh, Willie is hanging out with that lawyer at Harlan Howard's house. There's a big late night party in Nashville. Harlan Howard is a great, great songwriter. Pick Me Up on Your Way Down, Tiger by the Tail, had a lot of hits, a huge string of hits, and had some legendary parties. And they're up really late at night, and people are passing around the guitar, and Willie plays something. He says he doesn't even remember what it is, but something about existentialism and how Willie fits into the universe. And it was way out there, and it wasn't really that good. And he says he plays that song, and then he's hanging with Doug Somm, and Doug Somm says, there's somebody I want to introduce you to. And he introduces him to Jerry Wexler, and he's the person responsible for making, all of us know about Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin and a lot of other people. He's a huge figure. But Jerry Wexler says to Willie, I know what you're all about. You're about artistic integrity. And man, I love what you just did. Sounds like a continuation of Yesterday's Wine, one of my favorite records. And Willie says, this sounded like a man I needed to sit down and talk to, so I did. Turned out Wexler, for all his R&B background, was a stone-cold country music scholar. He knew all about Bob Wills, Lefty Frizzell, and Adolph Hoffner. He said he'd been following me for years. Even better, Atlantic was opening a Nashville office, and he wanted me as his first signing. And Willie says, man, Nashville hasn't been that good to me. I'm not so sure. He's like, well, why don't you come to New York and record? And, Willie's kind of thinking, I don't know, man, what would be so good about that? So Wexler gives him the whole song and dance of why he should come and how a change would be good for him. Wexler says, when we first signed Ray Charles in the 50s, we provided the studio musicians for him, but Ray never really found himself until he started using his own cats, his own songs, and his own concept. Ray taught me something I'll never forget. As a producer, sometimes the best thing I can do is get out of the way. Record for Atlantic, Willie, and I'll guarantee you I'll get out of your way. And Willie says, I got some pretty strange concepts. He says, the stranger, the better. He said, what I got in mind is a gospel album. Wexler says, I love gospel. My favorite Aretha record is Amazing Grace. We cut it in a Baptist church. I'd been after her to do a gospel record for years. I felt that she needed to connect with her roots. And Willie says, well, I've been feeling the need to reconnect with my roots too. And Willie says, you're not worried that it won't be commercial? Fuck commerce. You're going for art. You're going for truth. And when the art is truthful, sales will follow. You don't need restrictions, Willie. You've had enough of those. What you really need is artistic freedom, and I'm here to give it to you. Willie says, I've never heard a record man talk this way. On the spot, I decided that Wexler was my man. Fortunately, our talk coincided with the end of my contract with RCA. I told Neil Reshin to cut a deal with Jerry Wexler, and just like that, I was on my way to New York City to make some music. So Willie's talking about how he had never recorded with his own band before. And Wexler, put together a band, do anything that you want, complete artistic freedom in New York. And this gets left out of the story. People don't talk about this enough. So Willie goes to New York. He had never recorded with his sister, Bobby, before, and he always wanted to. So he told Bobby, let's go to New York. You're going to play on one of my records. And he gets B. Spears, Paul English, Jimmy Day, and Doug Somm, who flew to New York. And they record this gospel album, the song Uncloudy Day. That's actually one of my favorite Willie songs. I love his version of that. It's just so right. And that was on this gospel album that he made. It says they cut it in 2 days' time. They cut 24 songs. Jerry and Arif weren't interested in sweeteners, no angelic choirs, no overwrought strings. They wanted it raw, right, and real, which is exactly the way Willie Nelson should be recorded. But it went so well, Willie was so stoked at recording 12 songs in 2 days that, Wexler's like, man, if you're enjoying it and you got your creative juices flowing, why don't you just stay here and record some more stuff? And he's like, I don't know what I would record. And he's like, well, you've served the Lord. Maybe you need to record one that serves the devil, feed the devil a little bit, jokingly. And Willie went back to the hotel room and started writing up some songs. And he's in the bathroom just thinking, what could I write? What could I write? And in the hotel bathroom, there was one of those bags that you put tampons in, and he starts writing out the lyrics to Shotgun Willie on it. And he writes that, and he sings it to Wexler the next day, and Wexler's like, man, that's great. We got to record that. Let's make an album of stuff like this, and we'll call it Shotgun Willie. And so they did. And Willie says, Wexler's attitude really pumped me up. I cranked out songs one after another. The atmosphere was right. Whereas Nashville had always been uptight about musicians smoking dope in the studio, New York didn't give a shit. Wexler got high with us. Wexler never bugged me to put on sweeteners to stimulate sales. I felt free to tap into my imagination, no holds barred. I felt free to go against the grain in tunes like Sad Songs and Waltzes, a story about why this particular song would never sell. Willie asked Wexler about, I'd like to record a couple of Bob Wills songs. He says, do it, man. It's your roots. That's what we're doing here. We're recording your roots. We want that on record. So they recorded Stay All Night and Bubbles in My Beer. Willie says, I decided to cover 2 songs that were on the opposite ends of the emotional Richter scale. Johnny Bush's Rowdy Whiskey River and Leon Russell's rhapsodic A Song for You. In Nashville, I'd caught hell for my idiosyncratic singing. For years, I heard producers tell me that my phrasing was off. Your phrasing reminds me of Ray Charles and Sinatra, said Wexler. Like you, they're great proponents of rubato, elongating one note, cutting off another, swinging with an elastic sense of time. Only the jazz artists understand that. What others called a deficit, Wexler was calling an asset. When I was through cutting Shotgun Willie, we had an album that would have never been allowed to be made in Nashville, but a New York-based label like Atlantic and a New York R&B producer like Wexler couldn't have been happier. They put out Shotgun Willie before the Troublemaker, and wouldn't you know it, the thing sold like hotcakes. FM radio, all the rage back then, ate it up. It's Willie Nelson praising New York. All of this was this wonderful bridge that allowed him to go back to Texas. And the recordings that he would later make may have never been possible if he didn't make these contacts in New York who understood Willie Nelson. I think it's beautiful that an R&B producer in New York understood Willie Nelson much better than just about anybody in Nashville. And I'd like to know what you guys' favorite song might be off of that Shotgun Willie album, or maybe even the Troublemaker, the gospel album. Like I said, I'm all about Uncloudy Day. It's hard to beat Whiskey River, and Stay All Night. But his version of Song for You is pretty great too. But tell me in the comments what your favorite song is, and like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe. And I'll talk to you soon. Much love to you.